Hello everyone and welcome to our second content check-in video for World War One. In our first video, we talked a little bit about the four causes of World War One, as well as the triggering event that started this whole humongous war. But the majority of the conversation was really spent on the conditions inside the trench, because we know that World War One was a war of trenches. They didn't really move very much for the first 3 or 4 years that they were fighting. Now, today's video is just focusing on what about America? We know these European powers and, Turkey and everybody, they were fighting to the death for years in these trenches. But what was the U.S. doing? The U.S. was neutral. They were isolated. They really didn't want to get involved, and they had the benefit of the Atlantic Ocean. It's huge. They had no reason to have to deal with Europe. They were producing their own food. They had factories going in America. We were a #1 producer of many things at that time. So they didn't need Europe as much. They pretty much stayed out. They were willing to ship some goods to them, but still they could stay isolated. So what changed? Now, the interesting thing about World War One and the United States involvement is there's some more reasons that I'm going to explain, but there are two big ones that usually that are spoken about in the history book. So that's what we're going to focus on. The first one took place in May of 1915, and that was the sinking of the Royal Merchant ship Lusitania. So the Lusitania left New York and was on its way to England. Now, typically, if you were a ship going into a war zone, you had to kind of go like in a zigzag motion. You mixed it up because you didn't want to be an easy target for a submarine. Now, we know submarines are underwater boats, right? And their main advantage is that they can go undetected for the most part until they have to surface or until they're going to fire, which usually means they had to surface a little bit, especially at this time. Usually, they would say, hey, we're going to sink your ship. Get on the lifeboats. We don't want anyone to die, but we don't want any supplies making it to our enemy. But see, that didn't happen here. When the British ocean liner was on its way and it was getting close to Ireland, a German submarine shot a torpedo and hit the ship. Now, most people, when they think of like ocean liners, cruise ships, when they sank, one of the most famous ones is the Titanic. We know the Titanic hit an iceberg, and it took a really long time to sink. That didn't happen here. This ship sank in less than 18 minutes. So think about how fast that is. I mean, that's shorter than a TV show. If you were like, oh, I just need 18 more minutes of sleep, not very much. So it sank really fast. And the thing about the ship sinking is, so if the ship was like this and it kind of went like that, it'd be different, right? Or if it went flat down. Well, this ship was at an angle, okay? It was at an angle, which means that any lifeboat on the one side, which is boom, banging against the side of the ship, they couldn't even get it in the water. Now, the other side of the ship, it was so tilted that people were literally just falling into the water. Now, there are some famous people that have died while on the Lusitania. One of them is a family member of the Vanderbilts, and some of you may know Cornelius Vanderbilt, who was the very famous person connected to the railroad industry a long time ago in the 1800s. Now, when this ship started sinking, one of the stories that really stood out was there were a bunch of people on a lifeboat. Now, there were hundreds of lifeboats on this ship, and only 6 made it. Imagine that, only 6. But this one particular lifeboat was stuck. And a couple of men climbed up onto the boat and started taking knives, and they were like sawing as really fast as they could in order to get the lifeboat free so it would go in the water. But no matter what they did, they just could not get the lifeboat free. So they begged the people, just jump, and they didn't. And unfortunately, when the ship went down, it like sucked down the entire lifeboat with it. Very sad. It's hard to imagine a ship sinking so fast. But when that ship sank, over 100 Americans, I think they said 128 approximately, died. So America was furious, and they couldn't believe that an ocean liner was a target. Now, in the Germans' defense, I guess I would say, history shows that there was ammunitions or like weapons and things inside the ship that was being smuggled in to Great Britain. So they were justified in assuming that there were weapons or ammunitions on that boat. But the fact that so many like women and children and people died on that boat is it's horrible. And President Woodrow Wilson was furious, and he demanded that Germany no longer use unrestricted submarine warfare, meaning no warning and just sinking ships. Now, Germany did not want the U.S. in the war. So because they didn't want the U.S. in the war, they agreed. And this is going to last probably for about 2 years for the most part. But Germany realized after a while they just couldn't they couldn't win because Great Britain kept getting supplies from America or South America. So they realized that they're going to change their tactic. They're going to go full-blown, unrestricted submarine warfare, and they're just going to sink everything. And they start doing that. But they know that there's going to be some Americans that are killed, and the president's going to be angry. And the Kaiser Wilhelm II, who was in charge of Germany, realizes that America is going to join this war. So what can we do to kind of prevent like them coming right away? We know they're coming, but let's try to make it hard for them. So they decide that they're going to get Mexico to attack the U.S. So they're going to send a message via Western Union telegram to the ambassador for Germany in Mexico to try to convince the Mexican government to attack the United States. Because if the United States is in a war with Mexico, it's going to take them a little bit longer to get to the war in Europe. But here's the thing. The only way that Germany could get that message was through a telegram of Western Union, which is an American telegram company, but it's based out of London. So they had to go through their enemy. Now, Great Britain broke the code. They found out that Germany was trying this, and they wanted to tell the Americans so badly. But they couldn't exactly, because then they would know that America would know that the British were spying on their telegrams. So what do you do? What do you know? It's like keeping a secret when you really want to just tell the world. And they needed America in the war big time. So luckily for them, since they know this was happening, they were able to get a copy of it in Mexico, show it to the Americans, and the Americans went nuts, and they were like, that's it. Wilson was like, we are going to war. So he asked for a declaration of war in April of 1917. So he gets the declaration, and Mexico decides, we're not going to attack the United States. They were currently in a civil war as it was, and there was no way they were going to fight the United States because they knew they weren't going to win. So they were like, it's just not worth it. So they were just like, sorry, Mexico, you can't be trusted. You say you're going to give us money, but you already owe us money, so we're just not buying it. So we're out. We're out. So the United States needs an army, and they need it fast. So Wilson passes the Selective Service Act, which says that anybody between the ages of 18 and 45 has to sign up for the draft. It doesn't mean you're going to fight. It just means that you have to be eligible. And actually, to this day, if you were a male and 18, you have to register for the draft, which means they could force you to serve in the military. So they get an army together, about 3 million strong, and they go over to England, get themselves situated before they go into Europe, and they start fighting. And it's interesting because they were in France helping the French, because the French were actually the ones that helped the Americans defeat the British in the Revolutionary War. So it was kind of like, you helped us, now we're going to help you. So the Americans go, they fight in a couple of key battles, the Battle of Belleau Woods and the Battle of the Argonne Forest, which we'll get into later, but not yet. That's for a later clip. Now, why did the Americans have to get there so fast, though? That's the question. I mean, they haven't moved much in 4 years. What's a little bit more time? Well, in Russia, the Tsar at the time, Tsar Nicholas II, a little backstory on him. When his father died, he was not ready to be the Tsar. He hadn't had enough time to really learn the ropes, so to speak. So we know that he was not very good as a leader. Now, as far as being the Tsar, he wanted to have a son, because having a son meant you have somebody to take over the throne if you die. He just kept having girls after girls after girls after girl. He's just like, I want a son. So he finally gets a son, but the problem is his son was a hemophiliac, which means that he would bleed a lot or get hurt a lot and get badly bruised. So they had to really take care of him, but they couldn't let people know. Okay, so one night his son Alexei had a nosebleed. It was really bad, and they sought the help of this crazy holy man named Rasputin. And Rasputin come and he helps them. Shockingly, it's still a mystery how it happened, but he helped them. And he became kind of linked to the royal family, and people didn't like that. And after defeat after defeat after defeat, they've had enough of him. So the Tsar gets put under house arrest, and he steps down as king of Russia. And a man named Kerensky takes over in a provisional government. Like, let's just figure out what we can do until we get everything situated. He had two options. He could have continued fighting or left the war and tried to help Russia, but he kept fighting. And because of that, he was able to be taken over by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks. And when he took over, the communist government took over Russia. Now that's more on that is in a later video. But they're out of the war. Germany and Russia signed the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which ends the war with Russia and Germany. Now Germany can fight on one front. But the problem is the Americans have something that the other countries don't, and it's unlimited people and supplies, because America is not being bombed. America is running factories all the time, whereas Great Britain is under attack, and Germany and France are just blasted out, but America is not. So they're able to provide the supplies needed, and then they will actually push and change the tide of the war. So that's really why the U.S. came in. Russia left the war. The United States felt, and Wilson said, they need to make the world safe for democracy. So they're going to go fight and help the British and the French. So you have the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, and you have the Zimmerman telegram in 1917. And those are the two main reasons why the United States entered World War I. Okay, hopefully this was helpful, and the next video will cover the next step of World War I. Until then, have a wonderful day, everybody.